The warning alarm screamed through Lieutenant Kai Thompson's helmet. As his scout ship lurched out of hyperspace like a drunk stumbling from a bar, sparks cascaded from the control panel, and the acrid smell of burning circuits filled his nostrils despite the suit's filtration system. "Well, that's just perfect," he muttered, wrestling with unresponsive controls as a massive structure loomed before him, some kind of alien trading station, all gleaming metal and organic curves that seemed to pulse with bioluminescent light. His exosuit's heads-up display flickered ominously, showing critical system failures across the board. Life support was hemorrhaging power, and his backup cells had maybe 20 minutes left. The ship's automated distress beacon crackled to life, broadcasting on emergency frequencies as he fought to bring his dying vessel into the station's docking bay. The landing was less graceful rival and more controlled crash. Metal screamed against metal as his ship skidded across the deck plating, leaving a trail of sparks and debris. When the noise finally stopped, Kai found himself staring at the fractured canopy. Grateful to still be breathing, the station's atmosphere proved breathable barely. His suit's sensors detected optimal conditions, but with his life support failing, he'd need help fast. The docking bay's automated systems activated, and a holographic interface materialized beside his ship, cycling through various alien languages before settling on heavily accented English. "Welcome to Nexus Station Outpost 7, the synthesized voice announced. "Emergency protocols activated. Directing to nearest available technician." A series of lights illuminated a path across the bay toward what looked like a maintenance workshop. Kai stumbled along, his damaged exosuit making each step an effort. The workshop's doors hissed open, revealing a cluttered space filled with tools he couldn't identify and technology that seemed to blend metal with living tissue. "Another one?" The voice carried a distinctly feminine tone, rich with irritation, and tinged with an accent he couldn't place. From behind a massive piece of machinery emerged a figure that made his breath catch, not from his failing life support, but from sheer surprise. She was clearly alien, yet undeniably beautiful in a way that transcended species. Her skin was a pale purple that seemed to shimmer under the workshop's lights, and dark curly hair framed a face with features that were simultaneously exotic and familiar. Two eyes, just two, thankfully regarded him with professional assessment and barely concealed annoyance. "Let me guess," she continued, wiping her hands on a cloth that seemed to absorb the grease completely. "Another Terran scout with failing tech, expecting miracles from superior alien engineering." Yes," Kai managed, then caught himself. "I mean, my exosuit is critically damaged, and my life support is failing." "Obviously," she gestured dismissively at the warning lights covering his chest panel. "I'm Vexara, senior technician, and you are remarkably lucky that I'm between contracts and monumentally bored." Despite his dire situation, Kai found himself studying her movements as she approached. There was a fluid grace to the way she moved, each gesture precise and purposeful. Her workshop attire some kind of form-fitting coverall did little to hide an athletic build that spoke of both strength and femininity. "Lieutenant Kai Thompson, Terran Scout Corps," he introduced himself, trying to maintain some dignity despite his desperate circumstances. "Of course you are." Vexara circled him like a predator evaluating prey, her gaze clinical yet somehow intimate. "Let me see this advanced Terran technology." She produced a scanning device that looked more like abstract art than equipment, running it over his exosuit with practiced efficiency. Her proximity sent an unexpected warmth through him, partly from her body heat in the cool workshop, partly from something else entirely. Primitive power distribution, inadequate redundancy systems, and she paused, frowning at her scanner. "What appears to be the worst emergency protocol programming I've ever encountered. How do you people survive in space?" "Very carefully," Kai replied dryly, earning what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Well, Lieutenant Thompson, you're in luck. This is exactly the kind of challenge that might cure my boredom." She set down her scanner and fixed him with an intense stare. "But I warn you, fixing Terran tech requires unconventional methods." Something in her tone sent a shiver down his spine that had nothing to do with his failing life support. Vexara retreated to a workbench cluttered with tools that looked more like surgical instruments than repair equipment. She pulled out what appeared to be a data pad, its surface shimmering with alien script that shifted and reformed as she touched. If fortunately for you, I acquired a Terran maintenance manual from a trader last cycle, she said, not looking up from the device, though the translation matrix leaves something to be desired. Kai watched her work, noting how her brow furrowed. In concentration, despite her earlier dismissive attitude, she was clearly taking his situation seriously. The workshop's ambient lighting cast interesting shadows across her purple skin, and he found himself wondering what it would feel like to touch right, she announced, looking up from the pad with newfound determination. According to this, your exosuit requires a complete biological integration assessment. What now? Kai blinked. Biological integration assessment, she repeated slowly, as if speaking to a child. The manual is quite clear, quote, for optimal function, suit must achieve perfect symbiosis with organic component through comprehensive physical evaluation. That didn't sound right to Kai, but his knowledge of alien technology was limited, and his life support was still failing. The warning beeps from his suit were becoming more frequent. Okay, if you say so, he agreed reluctantly. Vexara stood and approached him with professional purpose, though something in her gaze seemed more intense than before. I'll need you to remain completely still during the assessment. Any movement could interfere with the calibration process. She began circling him again, but this time her movements were different, more deliberate, almost predatory. The scanner in her hands emitted soft pulses of light as she held it close to various parts of his suit. Interesting, she murmured, stopping directly in front of him. The manual indicates significant biomechanical interface points here. She gestured at his chest, then lower, and here. Kai felt heat rise in his cheeks as her gaze lingered. Interface points. Connection nodes between the organic component that's you and the mechanical systems. She consulted her pad again. It says the primary integration occurs at the torso region, with secondary connections at the… She paused, her purple skin darkening slightly, the pelvic stabilization zone. The what? Don't make this more difficult than necessary, Lieutenant. But her voice had lost some of its professional edge, taking on a slightly breathless quality. According to the manual, I need to evaluate the structural integrity of these connection points to ensure proper suit function. She moved closer, close enough that he could smell something pleasant and distinctly alien about her, like ozone after rain mixed with something floral. Her hands hovered near his chest plate. This is going to require direct assessment, she said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. Direct assessment, tactile evaluation of the biomechanical interface zones. She looked up at him, and for a moment, he saw something in her eyes that wasn't entirely professional. The manual is very specific about the importance of thorough examination. Kai's heart rate spiked, and he was grateful his suit's medical sensors were malfunctioning. And this is normal procedure? Absolutely. But Vexara's certainty seemed forced. Though I must admit, Terran physiology is fascinating. The manual describes humans as remarkably adaptable, with highly sensitive interface zones that require careful attention. She placed her hands on his chest plate, and even through the suit's layers, he could feel the warmth of her touch. Her fingers traced along the edges of the armor with surprising gentleness. The biomechanical integration appears stable here, she said, her voice taking on a clinical tone that didn't match the intensity in her eyes. But I'll need to check the secondary connection points to ensure complete system harmony. Secondary connection points, Kai repeated. Weakly, yes. Her hands moved lower, following the contours of his suit. The manual emphasizes that the pelvic stabilization zone is critical for optimal performance. Failure to properly assess this area could result in catastrophic system failure. The way she said catastrophic system failure made it sound like the most intimate thing imaginable. Kai found himself leaning slightly into her touch, drawn by something he couldn't quite name. I should mention, Vexara continued, her professional facade slipping as her hands reached his waist, that Terran biomechanics are far more complex than I initially anticipated. The manual suggests that thorough evaluation requires attention to the smallest details. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the pretense fell away entirely. The attraction crackling between them was undeniable, electric in a way that had nothing to do with his failing suit systems. "How thorough are we talking?" Kai asked, his voice rougher than intended. Vexara's lips curved in what might have been a smile. "Very thorough, Lieutenant. The manual is quite comprehensive in its requirements." "Now then," Vexara said, stepping back to consult her data pad once more. The brief moment of vulnerability had passed, replaced by renewed professional determination that somehow made the situation even more charged. "The manual indicates that proper assessment requires removal of external securing mechanisms." "External securing mechanisms?" Kai's voice cracked slightly. "Your belt," she clarified, setting down the pad and approaching him with purpose. "It's identified as the primary anchor point for biological core unit access." Kai took an involuntary step backward. Hold on. What exactly is a biological core unit?" Vexara paused, tilting her head as if the question were absurd. "You are, obviously, the organic component housed within the mechanical framework." She gestured at his entire body. "The manual specifically states that full calibration requires unrestricted access to the biological core unit for proper interface mapping." "Interface mapping," he repeated faintly. "Yes." She moved closer again, close enough that he could see flecks of silver in her dark eyes. "The process involves detailed, tactile assessment of all biomechanical connection points to ensure optimal system integration." Her hands reached toward his belt, and Kai caught them instinctively. The moment their skin made contact, her surprisingly warm and soft despite her alien nature. Both of them froze. The touch sent electricity shooting up his arms, and from the way her eyes widened, she felt it too. "Lieutenant," she said, her voice noticeably breathier, "you're interfering with standard protocol." "Standard protocol doesn't usually involve." He gestured vaguely at their current position, acutely aware that his hands were still wrapped around hers. "The manual is very clear," she insisted, though she made no move to pull away. "Belt removal is essential for accessing the primary biological interface zone. Without proper assessment of this area, your suit's life support integration could fail completely." The irony wasn't lost on him that his life support was already failing, but her proximity was making it difficult to think clearly. Her scent was stronger now, that intriguing combination of ozone and flowers that seemed to short-circuit his higher brain functions. "And this biological interface zone is here." She pulled one hand free and placed it flat against his lower abdomen, just above his belt. Even through the suit's undergarment, her touch burned. "The manual describes it as the primary integration nexus, highly sensitive and requiring extensive calibration." Kai's breath caught. "Extensive calibration, MMM." Her other hand joined the first. Both palms pressed against him as she looked up into his eyes. "The process is described as intensive, requiring sustained contact and careful attention to response patterns." They were standing so close now that he could feel her breath against his throat. The rational part of his mind was screaming that this couldn't possibly be standard repair protocol. But the way she was looking at him, professional exterior, barely containing something much more primal, made rational thought nearly impossible. "Vexara," he said softly. "Yes, are you sure this is what the manual says?" She hesitated for just a moment, doubt flickering across her features. "The translation is sometimes unclear, but the importance of thorough biological assessment is emphasized repeatedly." Her hands pressed more firmly against him. "I've never worked on Terran technology before. I have to follow the manual exactly, or risk causing permanent damage." The concern in her voice seemed genuine, even as her touch became more intimate. Kai found himself believing her, or at least wanting to believe her badly enough that the distinction didn't matter. "Okay," he said quietly, "I trust you." Something shifted in her expression at those words: surprise, gratitude, and something deeper that made his pulse race. Her fingers moved to his belt buckle with renewed purpose, but also with a gentleness that spoke of more than professional duty. "The manual warns that the biological core unit may experience heightened sensitivity. During the assessment process, she said, her voice taking on that clinical tone again even as her actions became increasingly personal. This is normal and indicates proper biomechanical integration, heightened sensitivity. Kai managed as she began working at his belt. Good to know. It also mentions that the technician should expect reciprocal response patterns. She looked up at him through her lashes, apparently. Successful calibration requires mutual feedback between organic and technical components. Mutual feedback, he repeated, wondering if she realized how her own breathing had changed, how her purple skin seemed to glow more brightly in the workshop's ambient light. Yes, the belt came free, and she set it aside with almost reverent care. The manual emphasizes that this phase of the assessment is critical. Any interruption could result in incomplete integration and potential system failure. Her hands returned to his waist, fingers tracing along the edge of his suit's undergarment. The touch was feather-light, but it sent shockwaves through his entire nervous system. How long does this phase typically take? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Vexara's smile was equal parts innocent and wicked. The manual suggests as long as necessary to achieve complete calibration. As Vexara's hands continued their assessment, a soft chime echoed through the workshop. She froze, then cursed in what Kai assumed was her native language's series of melodic, but frustrated-sounding syllables. What's wrong? He asked, noting the sudden tension in her posture. Translation matrix update, she muttered, moving to a console across the room. The station's AI must have detected errors in the linguistic protocols. She tapped several commands, and her data pad began flickering with new text. Kai watched her expression change from professional concentration to confusion, then to dawning mortification. Her purple skin darkened to a deep violet that he was beginning to recognize as her equivalent of blushing. Oh, she said quietly. Oh no. She turned to face him, the data pad clutched against her chest. Lieutenant Thompson, there appears to have been a significant translation error, despite his state of undress and the intimate nature of their recent activities. Kai found himself more concerned with her obvious distress than his own embarrassment. What kind of error? The kind that makes me look like either an incompetent technician or She paused, searching for words. A predatory alien taking advantage of a stranded human. You're not predatory, he said automatically, then caught himself. What exactly did the manual actually say? Vexara sank into a nearby chair, looking deflated. Gear diagnostics, standard equipment analysis. The phrase biological core unit was supposed to be power core unit. The interface zones were connection ports for diagnostic equipment. She looked up at him with genuine anguish. I've been following protocols for disassembling your suit, not whatever I thought I was doing. For a moment, they stared at each other in silence. Then, despite everything, his near-death experience, the absurdity of the situation, the compromising position they'd found themselves in, Kai began to laugh. You're laughing? Vexara looked offended. We almost, and you're laughing? I'm sorry, he gasped between chuckles. It's just the most action I've seen in months. And it was all based on a translation error for power core diagnostics. To his relief, her lips twitched upward. Most action? You have no idea how boring scout missions are, he admitted, moving closer to where she sat. Weeks alone in space. Nothing but empty systems and the occasional asteroid field. When you started talking about biological interface zones, I thought I'd hit the jackpot of alien-human cultural exchanges, even when you suspected it wasn't standard protocol. He sat on the edge of her workbench, facing her, especially then. Look, Vexara, translation error or not, I haven't felt this connected to someone in a long time, if ever. She looked up at him, vulnerability replacing her earlier mortification. You barely know me. I'm an alien technician who just spent the last hour essentially molesting you, under false pretenses. Are you? He asked gently, because it felt pretty mutual to me, and I got the impression you were discovering something too, not just following a manual. Her silence stretched long enough that he wondered if he'd misread everything. Then she sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of the galaxy. This station is my home, but it's also my prison. she said quietly. I'm the only one of my species here. Most days, I interact with nothing but machines and the occasional trader, who sees me as either a curiosity or a threat. When you arrived, injured and needing help, she shrugged. Maybe I wanted the manual to say what I thought it said. Kai slid off the workbench and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. Maybe I wanted to believe it too. Your life support is still failing, she pointed out, though she didn't pull away from his touch. Yeah, about that. How quickly can you actually fix my suit? Vexara's expression shifted back to professional competence, but with a warmth that hadn't been there before. Now that I know what I'm actually supposed to do, 20 minutes, maybe less. Your suit's problems are mostly software related. The translation error affected my diagnostic readings too. 20 minutes, he repeated. And then you'll be able to return to your ship, complete your mission, report back to your superiors. Her voice trailed off. Kai said carefully, I could file a report about how my ship suffered critical damage and requires extended repairs. Might take days, maybe weeks to get the parts needed. Are you suggesting you'd lie to your command structure? I'm suggesting that my ship did suffer critical damage, and that finding the right parts might take some time. He squeezed her hands gently, especially if I'm getting help from a technician who's willing to teach me about proper biomechanical interface protocols. Vexara's smile was radiant. The real protocols are much less exciting than what we've been doing. Maybe, Kai agreed. But I bet we could find ways to make even standard repairs interesting. She laughed, a sound like silver bells that made his heart race. Lieutenant Thompson, are you propositioning me? Kai, he corrected. And yes, I think I am. Is that culturally acceptable? I don't know, she admitted. I've never been propositioned by a human before, but I find I'm very interested in learning about human courtship protocols. Well then, he said, standing and offering her his hand. How about we start with fixing my suit and see where things go from there? True to her word, Vexara had his exosuit functioning perfectly within 20 minutes. But what should have been a simple repair turned into something far more intimate. As they worked together, her hands guiding his as she explained each system, their bodies naturally gravitating toward each other in the small workspace. The power coupling connects here, she murmured, standing behind him as he held a component in place. Her arms encircled him, hands covering his on the tool. Feel how it locks into position. I feel it, he said, though he was more aware of her warmth against his back, the way her breath tickled his ear when she spoke. Good. But she didn't step away, instead letting her cheek rest against his shoulder. Your hands are very steady for someone who was dying an hour ago. My hands are steady because I'm not dying anymore, he replied softly, and because I have an excellent teacher. She turned him in her arms, and suddenly they were face to face, close enough to share breath. The pretensive repair work fell away entirely. Kai, she whispered. Yeah, the translation matrix. It may have been wrong about the manual, but I don't think it was wrong about everything. What do you mean? Instead of answering, she rose on her toes and kissed him. The contact was electric, sending sparks through every nerve ending. Her lips were soft and warm, tasting faintly of something sweet and alien. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. I mean, she said against his lips, that some connections don't need translation. He cupped her face in his hands, marveling at the silky texture of her skin. Your people, do they have a concept similar to falling for someone? We do. Her smile was shy and radiant simultaneously. Though we call it gravitational alignment, when two beings find themselves naturally drawn into the same orbit. I like that, he said, then kissed her again. Deeper this time. She melted against him, her hands fisting in his shirt as she responded with surprising passion. When they separated, both were flushed him red, her a deeper purple that was quickly becoming his favorite color. Your ship, she said, breathlessly. You should check on your ship. My ship can wait, he replied, trailing kisses along her throat. Unless you're trying to get rid of me, never. The word came out as a gasp as he found a particularly sensitive spot beneath her ear. But your command will expect a report eventually. Eventually, he agreed, then lifted her onto the workbench, stepping between her legs. But right now, I'm more interested in exploring this gravitational alignment phenomenon." She laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Is that what we're calling it?" Among other things, his hands settled on her waist, thumbs tracing patterns on her skin through the thin fabric of her coverall. "Vexara, yes. How long between trader visits to this station?" "Usually several weeks, sometimes months." Her expression grew curious. "Why?" "Because I'm thinking my ship's going to need very extensive repairs. Might require some specialized parts that could take a while to acquire." Her smile was brilliant. "Specialized parts can be very difficult to find, especially for primitive Terran technology." "Exactly." He kissed her nose, charmed by the way she scrunched it in response. "And of course, I'd need a skilled technician to oversee the work, someone familiar with biomechanical interface protocols. The real ones this time." "Well," he said, his hands sliding higher along her ribcage, "maybe we could develop some new protocols. Cross-species collaboration for scientific purposes." "Very scientific," she agreed solemnly, then spoiled the effect by giggling as he nuzzled her throat. "Though I should warn you, Lieutenant Kai," she corrected, "my people are known for being very thorough in our research methods." "Thank God," he murmured against her skin, "because humans are known for our stamina." She pulled back to look at him, eyebrows raised. "Are you making claims about human endurance capabilities?" "I'm making promises about human dedication to scientific exploration, in that case," she said, sliding off the workbench and taking his hand. "I think this research project calls for more comfortable accommodations. My quarters have better equipment for extended experimentation." As she led him toward the workshop's rear exit, Kai caught sight of his reflection in a polished surface, disheveled hair, kiss-bruised lips, and the biggest smile he'd worn in years. "Vexara, yes? Remind me to send a thank-you note to whoever programmed that translation matrix." Her laughter echoed through the corridors as they made their way to her quarters, to beings from different worlds who had found something universal in each other. Behind them, his repaired exosuit sat forgotten on the workbench, its diagnostics showing all systems optimal, much like the hearts of its owner. And the woman who had fixed far more than just his gear, the stars beyond the station's viewports, seemed to shine a little brighter, as if the universe itself approved of their gravitational alignment. And somewhere in the depths of space, Kai's command would receive a report about critical system failures requiring extended repair. Time, the most honest lie he'd ever told, because some things were definitely worth the wait.